So, I've just completed my first Pokémon Nuzlocke. I played through Pokémon Y using only Fairy-type Pokémon. I followed the standard Nuzlocke rules of any Pokémon who faints is considered dead. I have to name every Pokémon that I catch. I can only catch the first Fairy-type I find on that route. Some other rules that I included are that I had to play on set battle style. I couldn't use items from the bag in battle, only held items, and I couldn't go over the next gym leader's highest level Pokémon. Also, I did no damage calculations at all. Just really quickly, I wanted to apologise as this is my first proper long video aside from a few crappy shorts, so I'm sorry for any mistakes I make in audio or actual video, because there will be mistakes. And if you enjoyed this content, let me know, and feel free to subscribe. I mean, I can't force you to, but I will get on my knees and shower you in friendship until you do. Pokémon Y takes place in the beautiful Kalos region, and are the first games where the Fairy type is available. Think of it like a warm-up challenge, because I had hoped that with just Fairy types being quite good in general, that this Nuzlocke wouldn't be too hard, but at some points I did struggle and have to put on my big boy trousers. Here are my encounters for the run. The list is looking pretty solid, but there's a lot of Pokemon here that I've never used before, so it'll be interesting. Although, I won't be able to use all of these, because some of them do overlap on what routes they're found on, etc. But I'll get into it as we go along. So, here I am, looking like a loser, but at least it's accurate to real life. For my starter, I chose Chespin. Not because it's my favourite of the Kalos starters, but because even though it doesn't matter which starter I choose, it will make my rival starter not weak to Fairy in its final evolution. Just adding a bit more of a challenge, because I don't want it to be too easy. After breezing through Santaloon Forest and the earlier routes, I get to Route 3, where I can pick up my first encounter, being an Azurill. I decided to call it Guilliman, and if you know the naming theme I'm going to go for during this, let me know down below. She ends up with a neutral nature, which is decent in a Nuzlocke, but she gets the extremely poggers huge power ability, which doubles her attack stat, which will be very useful. But Azurill as it is, won't be able to take on the bug type gym on her own. Even though Fairy resists bug, Viola's Vivillon will probably just kill it with Infestation. So my dumbass decided to run back and forth for like an hour in order to boost Azurill's friendship, so it will learn Charm at level 10, but also evolve into Marill, where it will learn Defense Curl, more importantly Rollout, and also get a bit of a boost in stats. Rollout, it's a risky strategy, some may agree. Am I stupid? All may agree. But damn it, do I live life on the edge, plus I feel like this is my only shot at beating the gym. Also, to just give myself that little bit more of an edge, I spent another bloody hour EV training Marill. At least you can't say I'm not committed, right? I train Marill in attack and HP EVs. Even though speed EVs would be good, I feel as if HP would be more useful, especially at this point in the game. Plus, I get speedier Pokemon later on anyway. So now, I feel far more confident and ready enough to take on the first gym, being Viola's Bug-type gym. Starting off the fight against Viola, her Surskit outspeeds me, hitting me with a resisted bubble, which does pitiful damage, and I go for a defense skill to boost my defense against physical moves, but also to do more of my first rollout. After taking another resisted bubble, I go for my first rollout, which is enough to take out the Surskit in one hit. Then Viola sends in her ace Vivillon, which obviously outspeeds me, going for an Infestation. This does residual damage over time, which would be scary, but one quad effective rollout is enough to cleanly take out the Vivillon in one hit, wrapping up the fight. After gaining access to Route 4, I don't get my encounters just yet. I'll explain later, just trust the process. After meeting these two geezers, I head on over to Professor Sycamore's lab for another potentially scary fight. After missing my first rollout and taking a weak tackle in return, I hit a rollout, but my Marill gets seeded, which seems really weird to say. But then, Guilliman turns into Sonic from Smash Ultimate, and it's another, and another, and another rollout, finishing up the fight. I then go downstairs and meet Daddy Lysander for the first time, who's yapping about genocide or something. But more importantly, what the hell is this roadblock in X and Y? Like, this lady literally walked straight through. After getting to Camphria town, I take a trip to the hotel, where I meet Mr. Bonding, who then turns off the lights and forces me to bond with him. After that questionable encounter, the next roadblock is this stupid Snorlax, but I'll skip over most of this part of the game because it's just kind of dull. Basically, we go to some palace, pay a scammy amount to get in, we go find this geezer's fur fruit, who is the owner of the palace, and he then gives us the poker flute once we found the fur fruit, which this will wake up the Snorlax. Then he sets off some fireworks to celebrate, and his butler notices my Riz and hands me some protection, and off we go. Finally, I can get my encounter on Route 7, where I run into the yellow flowers, which gives me a 35% chance of getting a Flabébé, and a 10% chance of getting a Spritzy. I get the more common Flabébé, who has this beautiful golden flower, so I call her Sanguinius, and she also gets a cool, neutral nature. This is perfect, as I can go back to Route 4 and get my encounter, but because of Dupe's Claws on Flabébé, I'm guaranteed to get a Ralts, who I call Jagatai, who gets a jolly nature, which is minus special attack, which sucks, but plus speed, which is more epic. Skipping forward a bit, I make it to Glittering Cave, where I have to fight Team Flare for the first time. But they are pretty rubbish, and I save this idiot scientist geezer, who doesn't even know that he's been surrounded by terrorists. I then get my Glittering Cave encounter, which is a guaranteed Mawile, who I call Ferrus Manus, who also gets a jolly nature, which is actually pretty good, but the Intimidate ability is extremely epic. I also run into Mr. Bonding, who forces me to bond once again, before fleeing into the night and getting away with his crime. Oh, and Ralts evolves into Curlier, so it may actually be useful now. I beat the shit out of this guy for trying to revive dead memes, and I can get my Route 10 encounter, which ends up being a Snubbull, which is a little annoying because I could have got an Eevee, which evolves into Sylveon. No matter, I catch the Snubbull and call her Lehman Russ, who gets the mid, gentle nature, which raises special defense but lowers defense, but at least Russ gets the Intimidate ability as well. Before the gym fight, I run back to Ambret Town to pick up the TM for Rock Smash, because I forgot to, and this will be very important throughout the fight. To begin the fight, I lead with Ferrus Manus in order to get an Intimidate drop on Grant Zamora, and because she resists all of Amora's moves. I move first, and with a quad effective Rock Smash, I take the Amora below half, getting a defense drop. The Amora fires back with the Thunder Wave, paralysing me. I probably should have prepared for this with a berry, but I'm stupid. Come on, you know this. The following Aurora Beam doesn't do too much, but I am fully paralysed, which sucks. Then I tank another Aurora Beam, but I'm paralysed again. After taking a critical hit Aurora Beam, I finally get to hit the Amora with a Rock Smash, taking it out. As Grant sends in his Tyrant, I pivot into Lehman Russ to get an Intimidate drop and taking a Strong Jaw bite. After taking another bite, I opt to go for Charm to further drop the Tyrant's attack. The next bite gets the flinch on me as I attempt to go for a Bulldoze, and then the Tyrant goes for Stomp, which does huge damage. In return, my Bulldoze does almost half damage and drops the Tyrant's speed. Try flinching me now, you dick! And I finish up the fight with the Bulldoze, earning my second gym badge. After the gym fight, I run into Team Flare yet again on Route 11, but I dispatch them with ease. In Geosenge Town, we have to fight Karina with her scary Swords Dance Lucarios. As Karina's Lucario sets up Swords Dance, I paralyse it, Thunder Wave, and swap into Ferrus Manus to get an Intimidate drop, as the Lucario is fully paralysed. Next, I hit it with a Rock Smash, but fail to get the defense drop as Lucario sets up another Swords Dance. I swap into Lehman to get an additional Intimidate drop, as Lucario goes for Metal Sound, which won't do anything because Karina has no special moves, so L to her. Lucario hits me with a Feint, which doesn't do too much, and I drop its attack by 2 stages with a Charm. After taking another Feint, I take out the first Lucario with a Bulldoze. Karina sends in a second Lucario, who goes for a Power Up Punch, and I return with Charm. Another Power Up Punch gets Lucario back to neutral, as I do more than half with a Bulldoze. It also drops the Lucario's speed. After a weak Feint, I can win the fight with one more bulldoze. I go on to get my next encounter being a Dedenne, who I decide to call Rogel Dawn, who annoyingly also gets a jolly nature. Looking back, I reckon I keep getting the jolly nature because of Jagatai's synchronized ability, which means my encounters are more likely to get the same nature as it. I also get my Reflection Cave encounter, which ends up being a Mr. Mime. But I probably would have rather got the tanky Carbink. But I call the Mr. Mime Alfarius. For some reason, I don't really know. But at least she gets a modest nature. Kulia also ends up evolving into Gardevoir, which is hugely epic and a big power boost to the team. Also, I think Mr. Bonding is following me. I pick up this Max Repel, which explains why women don't talk to me. Next, I have to go to the Tower of Mastery, and I kinda skip through all the dialogue, but I do have to fight my rival. Serena leads with her Meowstic, and I with the newly evolved Gardevoir. On my first turn, Serena goes for a fake out, causing me to flinch. But on the second turn, I outspeed and paralyse the Meowstic with a Thunder Wave, who is then fully paralysed. I then go for a Magical Leaf, which only does a little bit of damage, and the Meowstic is fully paralysed again. Because Jagatai can't do too much damage, I swap into Dedenne as Serena sets up a Light Screen. I do about 25% with the super effective Physical Thief and taking a Disarming Voice in return. I try for a Parabolic Charge, which annoyingly only does a tiny amount as the Meowstic is paralysed. I go for another Thief, getting it into the red, and take another Disarming Voice, and I finish off the Meowstic with another Thief. Kinda embarrassing it took me this long to kill the Meowstic, but whatever. Rogel also levels up and learns Volt Switch, and Serena sends in her Absol, who I use the newly learned Volt Switch to swap out into Guilliman, who tanks a bite. After taking a second bite, one Aqua Tail is enough to finish off the Absol. Serena then sends in a race Brexin, who hits with a weak Psybeam, and I return with a stab, super effective, huge power boosted Aqua Tail, which demolishes the Brexin. I don't think anyone expects the fighting gym to be very difficult on this run, but here we are. I lead off with Jagatai, who takes the fake out from Mienfoo on the first turn, and on the second going for a stab Confusion, which one-shots the Mienfoo. Karina's Machoke is up next and suffers the same fate, getting one-shotted by a Confusion. Finally, Karina sends in her ace, Hawlucha. This thing can be a little scary, so I think about what to do. I decide to go for a Thunder Wave to paralyse the Hawlucha, but it does outspeed me and goes for a quad resisted Power Up Punch. Due to the paralysis, I outspeed and Confusion gets Hawlucha low. Karina attempts to stall with her Hyper Potions until I finish it off with a Confusion. I have to go back to the Tower of Mastery, but I learn that the Mega Guru's real name is Gherkin. I make my way to Coumarine City, where I decide to evolve Sanguinius into a Florges using a Shiny Stone. Also, Mr. Bonding is here. Yay, you dirty creep. I then have another rival fight outside of the Coumarine City gym, where things get a little bit hairy, but we push through fine without any deaths. Our next fight is the Coumarine City gym, and we're facing off against Ramos, the Grass-type gym leader. Ramos leads off with his Jumpluff, so I decided to lead with Lehman to get the Intimidate drop. The Jumpluff goes for an Acrobatics, which could be scary, but I use a Charm which drops its attack down another 2 stages. After another Acrobatics does little damage, I go for a Rock Tomb. Not expecting it to be enough, but it takes out the Jumpluff due to being a crit. Next, Ramos sends in his ace, Go-Go, who goes for a fairly strong takedown, doing more than half of my remaining health, so I go for a Charm. I then swap into Sanguinius, who takes the incoming takedown pretty well and gets some health back with leftovers. Unfortunately, a Fairy Wind doesn't do much, and I take a weak Bulldoze, which lowers my speed. Go-Go now outspeeds, hitting me with another takedown, as I go for another Fairy Wind. I go for a Wish in order to get some health back the turn after, and through takedown recoil and chipping away with the Fairy Wind, the Go-Go's health is slowly dropping. Wish and leftovers get me back up to 3/4 health, and I decided to switch into Ferrous Manus, getting an Intimidate drop and tanking a resisted takedown on the switch. Ramos then uses a Hyper Potion as I go for Fake Tears to harshly drop its special defense. I go for another Fake Tears and expect the incoming Bulldoze, which does about a quarter, but lowers my speed. I switch into Jagatai, tanking a takedown, and the next turn I go for Confusion, doing massive damage but just barely missing out on the KO as a Bulldoze lowers my speed. Expecting another Hyper Potion, I go for Confusion again, and so the next turn I can finish off the Go-Go with another Confusion. Annoyingly, that took a long time to knock out, but I'd rather play it safe than lose any mons. Ramos sends in his final Pokémon Weeping Bell, which I managed to outspeed and cleanly take out with a single Confusion. Can I just say that the Lumiose Badlands might be one of the most annoying routes in all of Pokémon. Dugtrios and Trapinches who chase you around and you can't flee from them due to Arena Trap, and the annoying wind mechanic which makes me so angry. I then have to fight Team Flare again in order to get into the power plant. Then I have to fight through a load of Team Flare grunts and this lady who is just protecting this bold guy. I then make it to Lumiose City, and because we fixed the power supply, I get to watch them light up Lumiose Tower, which takes us to our next gym battle against the electric type gym leader, Clement. Clement leads with an Emolga, and I with Russ, who gets an Intimidate drop, but this probably won't matter as I expect a Volt Switch, which he does, pivoting into the Magneton, who gets its speed dropped by my Rock Tomb, which I probably should have gone for Bulldoze. Even though Magneton can fire off stab mirror shots, I know a quad effective Bulldoze will be enough to cleanly take it out. Next up, Clement sends in his ace, Heliolisk, which can fire off fairly strong stab thunderbolts. Knowing this, I switch into Dawn, who resists electric. I taught her Dig before the fight and can dodge the next thunderbolt due to being underground. My Dig does about half of Heliolisk's health, and its thunderbolt does about a third in return. I could then dodge the next thunderbolt with another Dig, which is strong enough to take out Clement's Heliolisk. Clement sends his Emolga back in, and not liking the amount of health Dawn has left, I swap into Sanguinius to tank the incoming aerial ace, and getting some health back with leftovers. After taking another aerial ace and going for Wish, I get back above half of leftovers, and another aerial ace hits me as I go for a Fairy Wind, which crits and does big damage, and my wish becomes true, healing loads of my health alongside leftovers. I take another aerial ace and my Fairy Wind gets the Emolga deep into the red. Clement uses a Hyper Potion, healing Emolga back to full, as I hit it with another Fairy Wind, doing about a third. An aerial ace hits me below half, as I have to go for another wish. Another aerial ace gets me into the red, and I fire back with a Fairy Wind, getting Emolga into healing range again, as my wish comes true, and leftovers continues to get my health back. Clement uses a Hyper Potion, healing Emolga back to full, as I hit it with another Fairy Wind, doing about a third. An aerial ace hits me below half, as I have to go for another wish. I take another aerial ace and I fire back with a Fairy Wind, it gets the Emolga deep into the red, as my wish comes true and leftovers continues to get my health back, so I can tank the final aerial ace and finish off the fight with a Fairy Wind, getting me my 5th gym badge. I then proceed to explore Lumiose City for a little bit, and this lady says my Azurill is looking pretty ripped. I mean, sure lady, if you say so. Route 13 has another rival battle, but it's pretty uneventful. Ooh, toxic. I also pick up this fresh as hell t-shirt. My next gym battle is against Valerie, the fairy type gym leader who leads with her Mawile, which for some reason doesn't have Intimidate, and I lead with Rogal Dawn and go for a charm, forgetting that Mawile actually has Hypercutter, so its attack can't be lowered, as it hits me with a resisted crunch, which actually gets the defense drop. Instead, I go for Nuzzle in order to paralyze the Mawile, who is then fully paralyzed. I then have to hard swap into Ferrous Manus, because I forgot I got rid of Volt Switch. This results in a Mawile on Mawile showdown, as I take a resisted crunch, which also gets the defense drop. I set up my first Iron Defense, getting me to +1 as Valerie also goes for an Iron Defense. I set up my second Iron Defense as Valerie goes for a weak crunch. I go for my next Iron Defense as Valerie copies me again with her own. I go for my final Iron Defense as a crunch does pretty much nothing. After getting a useless Quick Claw activation, I can start setting up my Swords Dances, as Valerie hits me with a critical hit crunch, which still doesn't do too much. I set up another Swords Dance as Valerie the Mawile is fully paralysed. Next I set up my final Swords Dance, getting me to +6 as Valerie sets up another Iron Defense. I can then baton pass into Gilliman, who eats a resisted critical hit crunch on the switch. I go for an Aqua Ring because why not, as Mawile does nothing with a crunch. I hit my first Aqua Tail, which is obviously enough to one-shot the Mawile. Aqua Ring gets me back to full as Valerie sends in her Mr. Mime, which outspeeds and sets up a Reflect, which will halve the amount of physical damage, as I missed an Aqua Tail. I then have to tank a Psychic, which does about a third, and my next Aqua Tail hits, and is enough to take out the Mr. Mime. Gilliman also levels up, and I decide to let him learn Superpower, but this matters later on. Valerie then sends out her ace Sylveon, which does decent damage with a Stab, Dazzling Gleam, and I heal back 10 HP with an Oran Berry, which I forgot about. I then fire back with an Aqua Tail, which destroys the Sylveon, getting me the win, and proving that I am the better Fairy Trainer. Lehman also learns Play Rough, which is Stab and Epic. I then have to fight my way through the Pokeball Factory, which Team Flare have taken over, for some reason. Gotta be honest, I wasn't really paying much attention to the story. I just wanted to crump some terrorists. I can then get my next encounter being a Klefki, who I decide to call Perturabo. I then have to go to Frost Cavern, where I have to fight Team Flare again. Why are these losers so annoying? I can make my way to Anastar City. I then have another rival fight, but you know how that ends. And now I'm ready to take on the Psychic type Anastar City gym. Starting off the gym fight, Olympia leads with her Sigilith, and I with Rogel Dawn. I outspeed going for a Thunderbolt, getting it in the red, as it sets up a Reflect. Olympia uses a Hyper Potion, and another Thunderbolt gets it back in the red. Olympia uses another Hyper Potion because she's a little bitch, and my next Thunderbolt gets her low as I can follow up the next turn with one last Thunderbolt getting the KO. Olympia sends in her Slowking, which I hit with a Thunderbolt doing more than half, as the Slowking sets up a Calm Mind to boost its special attack and defense, allowing her to just barely survive the next Thunderbolt. She returns with a Yawn, making Rogel drowsy. I could avoid the sleep by swapping out, but I don't have Volt Switch, so I just decide to go for Parabolic Charge and knock out the Slowking as Dawn falls asleep. Olympia sends in her ace Meowstic, and I swap into Sanguinius, who takes a weak Fake Out. Meowstic's Psychic doesn't do too much, and I fire off Toxic. After 6 turns of Protect, Wish and Leftovers Recovery, I can stall out the Meowstic, getting me a cheeky win and my 7th gym badge. I then gotta head back to Lysander Cafe, which, shocker, isn't actually a cafe. I then have to fight Lysander for the first time, but for some reason, at this point in the game, you have to fight him pretty much 3 consecutive times. Lysander fights 1 and 2 go off without hitch. I then have to fight Jeff Bezos and catch the Yveltal, because you have to. I now have to fight Lysander for the last time, and what the hell are these flying things? Like, what do they even do? He beats with his Mian Xiao, and I with Jagatai. I go for a super effective Psychic, which is enough to take it out in 1 hit. Lysander sends in his Honchkrow as I decide to swap into Rogel, taking a Steel Wing, which does about a third. I can then fire back with a Thunderbolt, which is enough to one-shot the Honchkrow. Next up is his Pyroar, who I'm able to do about half to with a Volt Switch. I go into Gilliman, who takes a Fire Blast. Pyroar then outspeeds and goes for another weak Fire Blast, as I miss an Aqua Tail. The Pyroar uses another Fire Blast, and I can return with an Aqua Tail, taking out the Pyroar. Finally, Lysander sends in his scary Gyarados. I swap into Lehman to get an Intimidate drop, as Gyarados Mega Evolves and goes for an Earthquake, doing about a third. I swap into Ferrous Manus for another Intimidate and take a neutral Iron Head. I pivot back into Lehman for yet another Intimidate and eat an Earthquake, which doesn't do too much. I attempt to go for Play Rough, but Gyarados outspeeds, hitting me with a super effective Iron Head, which crits, taking out Lehman Russ, giving me my first death. At least I can safely switch into Ferrous Manus, getting another Intimidate. I then have to tank a super effective Earthquake and go for an Iron Defense. Hoping it doesn't crit, I take another Earthquake and can baton pass into Rogel. I outspeed and hit it with a Thunderbolt, taking it below half, and the incoming Earthquake also doesn't crit, meaning I can fire off one more Thunderbolt, winning me the fight and destroying Team Flare for good. I arrive at Snowbell City, but I have to go fetch the gym leader from the Pokemon Village. On the way, I run into my final encounter, being a Jigglypuff, who I call Fulgrim, but I have no intention of using. After getting the gym leader to actually do his job, I'm ready to face the final gym, being Wulfric and his ice types. Wulfric leads off with his Abomasnow, and I start with Sanguinius. The Abomasnow's Snow Warning sets up Hail. I miss a Toxic and get hit for a little with an Energy Ball. I then go for Protect to stall a turn of the Hail, as Abomasnow fails with an Energy Ball. I then land my Toxic as I take another Energy Ball, which lowers my special defense. After a few turns of alternating through Protect and Wish, the Abomasnow succumbs to Toxic. I know Toxic stall is a little cheesy, but it's just such riveting gameplay. Next in is Wulfric's Cryogonal. I go for Protect to get some leftovers recovery, as it annoyingly sets up Hail. I switch into Rogal Dawn, who gets hit with a Confuse Ray, so I have to double switch into Guilliman, who tanks an Ice Beam. Cryogonal outspeeds and hits Guilliman with a Confuse Ray, which causes me to hit myself in confusion. After taking another Ice Beam, I try again, and my superpower is enough to take out the Cryogonal. Wulfric sends in his ace, Avalugg, so I swap into Rogal as he sets up a curse. I go for Charm as he sets up another curse. We then do the same again. I go for a Nuzzle in order to paralyse the Avalugg, who is then fully paralysed. I fire off a Thunderbolt doing about 3/4, but an Avalanche hits me for big damage. But because I can outspeed, one more Thunderbolt finishes the fight, getting me my final gym badge. The next big fight is with Serena on the Victory Road. She leads with Meowstic, and I with Jagatai. I go for a Calm Mind to boost my special stats and have to take a Shadow Ball, which doesn't do too much. I go for another Calm Mind to further boost my stats, and another weak Shadow Ball also doesn't do too much. Then I can go for a Shadow Ball of my own, taking out the Meowstic. She sends in her ace, Delphox, which I manage to outspeed, and a +2 Shadow Ball takes it out. Her Jolteon comes in and outspeeds me with a Discharge, doing little damage, and in return my Psychic one-shots it. Her Altaria comes in, but goes down to a Moonblast, and she sends in her final Pokémon, Absol, which also goes down to a Moonblast. Meaning Jagatai just soloed the whole fight, making it a pretty easy final fight. I then spent a long time getting to the level cap, getting important TMs, and training up Mr. Mime. Here is my team. Jagatai, the Gardevoir. Guilliman, the huge power Azumarill. Sanguinius, the Florges. Alfarius, the Mr. Mime. Ferrous Manus, my intimidating Mawile. And Rogal Dawn, my Dedenne. I didn't list my moves and items because before each battle they change a lot depending on what battle I'm doing. I'm now ready to take on the Elite Four. I decide to fight Drasna first, because it's my best matchup on paper. Despite this, she's still pretty strong. She leads with her poison type Dragalge, which knows Sludge Bomb, and I lead with Jagatai. I didn't lead with Ferrous because I thought my stab super effective Mind Plate boosted Psychic would be enough to take it out, but it doesn't, meaning I have to take a Sludge Bomb, which I live, but it also gets the poison. Drasna goes for a Full Restore as I get it back down with a Psychic. Drasna uses another Full Restore, and I another Psychic. I have to swap out as the poison will kill me, so I go into Ferrous Manus, who is immune to Sludge Bomb. Ferrous manages to outspeed, and one Iron Head put the Dragalge into the ground. Drasna sends in her ace Noivern, which has Flamethrower, so I have to switch into Guilliman, who takes it very well. A Super Fang halves my health, as I don't miss a Play Rough and can take out the Noivern. Drasna sends in her Altaria, which outspeeds, going for a Cotton Guard to drastically raise its defense, as I miss a Play Rough. I get hit by a Moonblast doing decent damage and miss another Play Rough. I risk it and the next Moonblast gets me very low, as I finally hit a Play Rough, which does over half but doesn't KO due to Cotton Guard. I swap into Rogal Dawn, who takes a Moonblast pretty well, and I can outspeed and fire back with a Thunderbolt, taking out the Altaria. Drasna's last Pokemon is Druddigon, so I use a Volt Switch and pivot into Ferrous Manus to get the Intimidate, as Retaliate does very little. I outspeed and one Play Rough is enough to take out the Druddigon, but I don't need to worry about the Rough Skin damage because we've won. 1 down, 3 to go. Seabold is up next and I have a plan. He leads with his Clawitzer, which can be a little scary with Mega Launcher, and making her debut is Alfarius. True to his name, He's very tricky, so I set up a light screen to half the damage of the incoming special moves, and Chloritzer goes for a water pulse, doing a bit of damage. I go for a Calm Mind, boosting my special stats as I'm hit with another water pulse. I go for another Calm Mind as a water pulse gets me below half, activating my citrus berry, getting me back some health. I use another Calm Mind as a water pulse doesn't do much. Phase 2 of my plan is to baton pass into Jagatai, who eats a water pulse and can outspeed the next turn with a Thunderbolt, taking out the Chloritzer. Seabold sends in his Gyarados, but I can outspeed and take it out with a quad effective Thunderbolt. Next he sends in his ace, Barbaracle, which also can't survive a Thunderbolt. Finally he sends in his Starmie, which actually manages to outspeed and go for a light screen of its own, but this still isn't enough to save it from a Thunderbolt, winning neither fight. Malva is up next, which can be a little scary as fire resists fairy, but I do have some good counters. She leads with her Pyroar, as I lead with Rogel Dawn. I outspeed and paralyse the Pyroar with Nuzzle, and the Pyroar is fully paralysed. I go for a Volt Switch and switch into Guilliman, as the Pyroar is fully paralysed again. Malva decides to use a full restore as I go for a Power Up Punch to boost my attack. The Pyroar now outspeeds, going for a Hyper Voice, which does good damage, and I can fire back with another Power Up Punch to take out the Pyroar and further boost my attack. Malva sends in her Ace Talonflame, which decides to go for a Flare Blitz for some reason, and my Citrus Berry activates and I can take out the Talonflame with a Waterfall. Next in is her Torkoal, which I can easily outspeed and one-shot with a Waterfall. Her final Pokemon is Chandelure, which manages to outspeed and go for a Confuse Ray, but because Guilliman is a beast, he breaks through and takes out the Chandelure with a final Waterfall. The Steel-type Elite Four member, Wikstrom, might just be the scariest fight in the run. This is really going to test my Fairy Pokemon, so let's do it! He leads with a Klefki, and I decide to lead with Guilliman. Klefki goes for spikes as I go for a Power Up Punch, doing a little damage but getting a damage boost. After Klefki uses another spikes, I can take it out with a Bulldoze. Next comes in Probopass. I outspeed, doing massive damage with a quad Power Up Punch as it fires back with a super effective Discharge, which doesn't paralyse, but I had the berry just in case. Wikstrom uses a full restore as I get it down to its sturdy with a Power Up Punch. This happens again the turn after, and I can outspeed and take it out with a Power Up Punch. Wikstrom sends in his Scissor, which does good damage with an Iron Head, as I take it out with a Waterfall. Now, this may have looked easy, but he sends in his Aegislash, which is a beast. He goes for a King's Shield as I attempt to Bulldoze, but it gets blocked. It hits me with an Iron Head, which very annoyingly gets the flinch. I swap into Ferrous Manus to get an Intimidate drop, and I take damage from Spikes and a Sacred Sword, which does good damage. I hard swap into Rogel Dawn as Aegislash does nothing with a King's Shield. I outspeed and paralyse it with Nuzzle, and take an Iron Head, doing over half. Probably should use Charm. I swap back into Ferrous for another Intimidate, and the Spikes activate Citrus Berry and I take the Iron Head. I swap into my bulky Sanguinius, who takes loads from an Iron Head. I use Protect to dodge the next Iron Head, but the Aegislash is paralysed. I make the tough decision to swap into Ferrous for another Intimidate, who gets taken out by an Iron Head. A valiant sacrifice though, as I send in Jagatai, and I mispress on Will-O-Wisp, but this doesn't matter as Aegislash goes for the King Shield. I can fire off a super effective Shadow Ball, which does half and gets the special defense drop, as I'm forced to take a super effective Shadow Claw, which I do, and my Citrus Berry heals me a little. The Aegislash King Shields again, so I do nothing, and the following turn I can wrap up the fight with a Shadow Ball. After beating all of the Elite Four members, my next fight is against the champion. This is it, the fight of our lives against Kalos champion Diantha. Every moment, every decision has led up to this point. Will I be able to complete my first hardcore Pokemon Monotype Nuzlocke, or will I fall short and forever remain a useless disappointment to my family and friends? She leads with her Hawlucha, which could be quite scary with Swords Dance, but Rogel is able to outspeed, going for a stab, a super effective Zap Plate boosted Thunderbolt, which destroys the Hawlucha. Diantha's Tyrantrum comes in and I go for a Charm, dropping its attack by 2 stages. In return, it hits me with a powerful Head Smash, doing good damage. I use a Volt Switch to pivot into Guilliman, who takes a Head Smash. I have to take another Head Smash, which gives Tyrantrum brain damage, allowing me to go for a power up punch, taking it out and getting an attack boost. Aurora's comes in, which outspeeds and sets up a reflect as I go for a bulldoze. Due to the speed drop, I can outspeed and take it out for quad effective power up punch, getting me to +2. In comes the Gourgeist, which trick or treats me, giving me the ghost type, while I do most of its health with a play rough. Diantha uses a full restore as I go for a waterfall to test how much damage it does. Phantom Force causes me to miss my next play rough as reflect wears off, and on my next turn I take a lot of damage from the Phantom Force, because I'm a ghost type, and I can fire back with a play rough, taking out the Gourgeist. Diantha sends in her Goodra and misses a Fire Blast as I stay in and go for a bulldoze to lower its speed, and it does amazing damage. This causes Diantha to use a full restore as I go for another bulldoze. I then decide to swap into Sanguinius as Diantha heals Goodra back to full. I then use Confide, which is a move I don't think I've ever used before, and it lowers Goodra's special attack, and I can easily tank a Fire Blast. I go for another Confide, tanking a second Fire Blast as I dodge the next Fire Blast with Protect to get some health back with leftovers. I swap out into Alpharius, who takes a Fire Blast well, and use my first Calm Mind, whilst Goodra uses a quad resisted Focus Blast for some reason. I use a second Calm Mind, and a Muddy Water drops my accuracy. I go for 2 more Calm Minds without taking much damage or getting my accuracy dropped, until I go for a Light Screen, and the Muddy Water does nothing. I then Baton Pass and swap into Jagatai, who eats the Muddy Water. I miss a Psychic because of that 1 accuracy drop carried over, as a Focus Blast literally does 1 damage. I then hit my next Psychic, taking out the Goodra. Finally, Diantha sends in her own Gardevoir, which Mega Evolves, but thanks to my Nature and EVs I'm able to outspeed and one-shot it with a Shadow Ball. A little bit of an anticlimactic ending to my first Nuzlocke, but we did it. With only 2 deaths, I'm happy to say I'm not a complete disappointment to my family. Wait, this video took me 2 whole weeks, which means 2 whole weeks of straight Pokemon. I guess I'm still a disappointment to my family, but I didn't disappoint myself, and that's what really matters, right? Right? Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you want to see me spend my life playing Pokemon, because I want to get another Nuzlocke posted in about 2-3 weeks. So stay tuned, and until then, stay frosty. You mean people don't actually say that? Bitch.